What type of people ought we to support? And that's really a little bit of the subject that we're dealing with here in 3 John. What types of people should be in our pulpits and should be teaching in our churches? Now, we already saw in 2 John there are certain types of people that you don't support, right? 2 John was about false teachers. He wrote about not inviting them into your home or even giving them a place to stay. Don't assist them in their work, or else you become complicit in the spreading, the propagation of their false message. 3 John is about the kind of people that you should be supporting. 2 John is about the type of people you should not be supporting. 3 John is about the type of people you should be supporting. And this letter is being written by the Apostle John to a guy named Gaius. And we talked about him last week. We're not going to, you could go back and listen to that. The Apostle John loves Gaius. Gaius is walking in the truth. He's been supporting and helping God-honoring Christian workers. And this brings joy to the old apostle, who we're guessing is somewhere around 80 years old at this point, as a reminder, somewhere around 80. Unfortunately for Gaius is fighting an uphill battle. And so are faithful Christians today, to be honest with you. When I was a kid, there was this kid's book that my older brother would read to us. It was called Artie the Smarty. All right, Artie was a real smarty. When all the little fish swam this way, Artie swam that way. When all the little fish swam that way, Artie swam this way. And that's how the whole book went, right? And mean old crab. And my older brother would be like, he'd read it and like, Artie was a real smarty. And, so he always made us laugh about this. But the idea that stood out to me was, here was this one little fish, he's fighting against the grain. The whole school of fish is going this way, he's going this way. And that's kind of how I see what's going on a lot of times today in the world with faithful churches. They're swimming against the current, you know what I mean? They're going against the grain here with the plethora of the smorgasbord of false teachers that are out there today. And Gaius is fighting an uphill battle because not everyone is supporting the Christian teachers, the sound Christian teachers. One guy named Diotrephes. Now remember this, Diotrephes, not good. How can we, so we have Diotrephes who's bad, and we have Demetrius who's good. What type of word association can we come up with to help you remember that Diotrephes, I struggled with this. I tried to think like alphabetical or what sounds. Diotrephes bad, Demetrius good. Someone come up with some type of word association or sound association that can help you remember that Diotrephes is bad, he's so bad, and Demetrius is good. How can we, Abby? Okay, we could. I think we could work with that, right? I should call you before I preach all my sermons. Diotrephes is like die. Like dying's not good. You don't want to die. I mean, I guess we could say, though, I don't want to confuse people. We could say, for me to die is gain. Anyway, go ahead.
Demetrius has the word meat in it.
And meat is good. Yes! Perfect. Diotrephes, dying, that's bad. Demetrius has meat, and meat is good. Meat's for the belly, and the belly for meats, right? Paul writes. So, this guy Diotrephes, he's been rejecting the Apostle John's words, and he's been putting sound teachers out of the church. Now, we're going to talk more about him next week, but I do need to refer to Diotrephes, dying, right? Diotrephes, who's bad, and Demetrius, who is good, right? We have to talk about those guys a little bit. I like that. I'll have to write that down for next time I go through this. In like 25 years, if I'm still alive. Anyway, Gaius is in an uphill battle again, and he's going against this influential church leader who is doing wrong. Diotrephes is doing wrong. Gaius himself is remaining faithful. And so the Apostle John commends Gaius for his faithfulness to the brothers. Look at 3 John 5. Let me just do what I do here. We're at the bottom of the screen. Beloved, now you remember from last week, every time we see that word in the New Testament, every time we see it, it's always what? Plural, referring to a group of people, except in 3 John, where it's referring to one dude, right? One righteous dude, all right? It's referring to Gaius, right? A single person. You know, John, and of course, John has a real relationship with this guy, enough to call him a beloved person. Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially when they're strangers. So Gaius is acting faithfully. A little bit more about this guy. He's been showing hospitality to traveling Christian speakers, and these guys are speakers or maybe even missionaries who are approved by the apostles, or perhaps have the stamp of approval of John and his circle of people. So these aren't just random people. These are people who are connected to the Apostle John, who are connected to a sound school of teachers. They're theologically sound men. They've been tested by spiritually mature leaders. It makes me think a little bit of why Bible college and seminary matter. Because when a guy works his way through seminary, it's like, seminary professors don't see everything about you. They don't follow you around. They don't see how you live your daily life. But they see enough of you to be able to say with a fair amount of conviction, this guy has our support, right? And we're putting our stamp of approval on this guy. But that's not how things work today. How things work today is most people just say, I want to start a church. God called me. That is what they mean when they say that. Is God? They have this emotion, this feeling that they want to do this thing, and so they just go and do it. And they're more like the random people that are out there. They don't have kind of they don't have I could say the theological street cred, that the other guys might have. And so we're not necessarily dealing with these absolute strangers that have no connection to anybody. They are strangers to Gaius, but they're people that have like John's stamp of approval. Right? So to reject a person that has John's stamp of approval is kind of like rejecting John. Now, Gaius is showing hospitality to these traveling teachers and preachers and evangelists and missionaries. And hospitality in the first century is a little bit different than it would be for us. For us, what would hospitality be? Me showing someone hospitality, what would that look like in the 21st century? What would that generally mean if we're saying someone showed hospitality? What would that generally mean? Just throw your hand up and give me something. What would that look like? I saw Ben first. I mean, 99 times out of 100, or at least 9 out of 10, it's you invite someone over. What were you going to say, Abby? Same thing. Anyone going to say something different? Most of the time, that's about what it looks like, right? Or you invite maybe someone out for dinner. That's nice too, right? I mean, that's a win. That's a win. I mean, unless someone's a really super, super awesome cook, they're both wins. They're wins. But that's kind of how we look at it today. It's like entertaining. We invite someone over for dinner. We entertain them for a few hours. Maybe we invite them to stay overnight, like for instance in the situation of like traveling students or something like that from a college or something. In the New Testament, it was considerably more than that. In New Testament times, it meant taking someone under your temporary care. So they would become a guest in your home and in your community. Now, like today, a hotel might be a reasonable option, but in the New Testament world, an inn wasn't necessarily a great place to stay. They were often overcrowded and filthy and insect and rodent infested. And sometimes innkeepers were thieves and extortioners who were just kind of looking for ways to get more money out of people. And sometimes inns were even used as brothels. Is that how you pronounce that? Brothel? Brothel? It feels like it should be brothel. whatever the case. In other words, like prostitution happens there. So you could see these aren't necessarily like the best places to go. And that's kind of some of the backdrop even for the Joseph and Mary story. So a lot of times people would stay with friends or family. What happens if you don't have friends or family? You need help from local believers. And that's kind of a little bit of the context of what was going on here. But it kind of worked both ways, because the person who was going into a town, he needed the hospitality to be expressed to him. But the person who was extending the hospitality, there was risk involved for them too, right? Because you don't really know the guy that's coming into your town. And some of these people might be bad people, or they may have nefarious motives. That is, they might have wrong motives where they're trying to take advantage of someone or try to steal from that person or something like, or injure a person. Then there are the false teachers out there. So you have people who are coming in like they're wolves in sheep's clothing, and they're pretending to be sound teachers. And so there's risk that's involved here. Because of that, sound teachers or traveling Christian speakers, they would carry letters, like letters of recommendation from influential leaders in other churches. So let's say someone was coming from Greenville, South Carolina, and it's an ancient context, right? We know Pastor Thornton lives in Greenville. He might show up with a letter from Pastor Thornton with Pastor Thornton's signature on the bottom of that letter. And we would know, okay, so this is a guy that, someone that we understand to be sound doctrinally, and he was a pastor here for 20 years. This is a good guy. We can trust this guy. We can help support this guy. We can extend hospitality to this guy. We can, given certain recommendations. For instance, someone comes here from the Lansdale area and they have a letter of now it doesn't work that way today because we have, we can make a phone call. But imagine we didn't have that stuff. They show up with a letter signed by Dr. Jeff Tuttle. Well, most of us would be like, hey, listen, if Dr. Tuttle's signature's on it, we feel pretty good about the guy, right? Like, I'm okay. We still want to check him out a little bit, but, we feel pretty good about it. Gaius is in that type of a situation where he's received travelers and he's given them a place to stay. And some of them, he may not even know some of them, but he trusts the leaders who recommend them. And that alleviates the risk to a certain extent. So he welcomes them into his home. And that's not necessarily a common thing, because remember, in the Mary and Joseph account, they weren't able there was no room for them at the inn, first off, right? So that was a problem. You might remember the situation at Sodom and Gomorrah, where hospitality being extended wasn't necessarily, by the way, Sodom and Gomorrah were loaded. Sodom was loaded with, Sodomites, kind of where the word comes from, right? It happened at Sodom, look, just read the account and look what they wanted to know the men. That tells you everything you need to know about whether or not sodomy is good. Did you know it used to be a crime? Sodomy used to be a crime. Not many days, what is it, maybe fourscore, and some years ago, something like that, maybe 80, what are we at, about 80 years ago, maybe sodomy, 1950s, sodomy was a crime. It was a crime, you go to jail for sodomy. Today, they throw the flag up, and everybody, loves to celebrate that God would never again flood the world with the rainbow. But anyway, the early church had to teach believers to show hospitality for a reason, and that's because people didn't always do it because of the risks that were involved. Check this out. Hebrews says something about this. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. I just love how it reads, right? Sometimes you have to memorize it that way. Don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers. Listen to what Jesus said on the Mount of Olives in Matthew 25:34. The king will say to those on his right, come. Now we're dealing with the sheep and goat judgment that takes place in the Olivet Discourse from Matthew 25, verses 31 all the way up through about verse 46, okay, right through the end of the chapter. Sheep and goat judgment, the very end of the Olivet Discourse. Anyone tell me why it's called the Olivet Discourse? Because it happens on the Mount of Olives, right? Sometimes it just makes sense, right? It's the question. The answers aren't always so. Man, yeah, why is it called? Because it happened on the Mount of Olives. Anyone know where in the Bible the Olivet Discourse takes place? Matthew. Keep going. 24 and 25. Matthew 24 and 25. An often misunderstood sermon, probably Jesus' second most famous sermon that he ever preached. Anyway, actually, maybe in today's world, it's up there. It might be the most quoted, maybe the second most quoted, I guess. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" The king will answer and say to them, "Truly, I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." And so we're seeing the importance of showing hospitality here, and Gaius gets it. He is acting faithfully in this matter. He understands what Jesus and the apostles taught. He's willing to do what's necessary, even though there might be a certain amount of risk. And he, Gaius, is the perfect guy for the job. What I mean when I say that is, Gaius is the perfect guy to receive the person who is who's carrying this letter, who is either Diotrephes or Demetrius. Which one do you think's carrying the letter from the Apostle John, who is a good guy? Demetrius, because meat is good, right? unless it's not like if it's turkey and you didn't cook it enough, you could, man, I undercooked my turkey a little bit, just a little bit. It was reading like 180 something, I was reading like 130, and I'm like, man, I don't want to risk like really drying this thing out, and I just cut off the stuff that wasn't quite cooked enough and started counting the hours. 72 hours, do I have salmonella? I made it, so I'm good. I didn't get it, but anyway. Meat is generally good unless you don't do it, handle it right. Or if you overcook it. You can't overcook steak. You might as well just throw it out. If you like well-done meat, just leave right now. I'm just teasing. Now, how did the Apostle John know what Gaius was doing? Who here likes their meat well done, by the way? I tease you about it. You've told me this, and I've teased you about it. Okay. Yeah, I've wiped that out of my memory, but now that you mention it. Yeah, man, it's just like throwing it right out. I got some good beef jerky, though. I'll give you. You give me the steak, I'll give you beef jerky. It'll be an even trade. Or shoe leather, for overcooked meat. How did the Apostle John know what Gaius was doing? How did he know that he was acting faithfully?
People were telling him.
Word had spread, yeah. People were telling him, right? The brothers had testified about his work, and we'll see that here in the first part of verse 6. "Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially when they are strangers, and they have testified to your love before the church." So these traveling brothers told John's entire church about what Gaius was doing. That word had spread around. Listen, Gaius is a good dude. He's receiving the messengers of the apostles. And so John's church understands that they have a friend when it comes to Gaius. They understand that Gaius is a person who expresses biblical love, who extends hospitality. He has compassion for those traveling Christian workers who are sacrificing their lives for the work of God. Now, Gaius' work might have cost him time and money, but it earns him great reward in the eyes of God. And here, actually, it earns him honor. Now, it's not why you do things like that, right? But here, it earns him honor in the eyes of the church. And let me tell you, we live, again, I say this all the time, we don't live in an honor-shame culture. New Testament culture was an honor, Greco-Roman culture. Jewish culture was an honor and shame culture. And that changes the way you read a few passages, like, for instance, the unjust steward, the way you read that parable there gets a little bit changed when you see this honor-shame culture. But that's another story for another day. Here today, there isn't a whole lot of people, there isn't shame. People don't have shame. Right? Just go out in summertime in Main Street in Stroudsburg. Go out in June. Is it June? Is June the flood pride month, where they're proud of the fact that the human race survived the flood? That's June. Go out on Main Street during June, and you'll see there's no shame. There is no shame in this culture, but honor is above rubies, right? To have an honorable name and an honorable reputation in the ancient world, and really is how it should be in today's world. And the church there's a touch of that in the church, because for the most part, people in the church, we do care about honor and shame. Right? We do care about that to a certain extent. And so to have a good name is far above rubies or above gold or above fine, it's an important thing. And here, these people have testified to Gaius' love before the church. They've testified to the church, and his name has received honor. Again, that's not why you do something like this, but that's kind of a side effect there. That's kind of a natural effect of showing biblical love and acting with Christian character. Now, I want to bring up something here about our own church. I like to commend our church. I like to talk about how great our church is and how great our people are and how sacrificial our people are. This is not one of those times. Okay, one of the main reasons why I pushed this message to evening service is because I didn't want to do this in front of the greater body that was the church. I was hoping some more people would hear this. But in July, we had a group of singers come from Maranatha Baptist University. And again, I'm used to commending the church because it ought to be. 9 times out of 10, it ought to be commended. In this particular case, I asked over and over and over again for people to help house them. And some people were away. And there were some people that offered to help, that maybe their living situation wasn't a perfect situation. Because I didn't want people in a difficult living situation or in a situation with lost people. I didn't want to bring the singers in and put them with maybe like a single guy or someone who maybe comes here once a month or twice a month. I wanted to put them with a faithful Christian family. Not a household of unbelievers where there's a saved person or two or something like that, or people who aren't as committed or whatever. And so I texted, and I sent more texts, and more texts, and I didn't get responses. And I wanted them to be in a comfortable situation with a saved, faithful family. And I'm just going to say that there were a lot of families in our church who, in this particular instance, failed big time. They failed big time. And we did not carry out what Gaius carried out. In the end, I think you guys, Brett and Dawn, took 5 of them. You took 5 of them, and I took 2. There was conversation about 4 and 3 or something like this, but I don't have the space. I was able to put one on the couch and one on the floor and an air mattress. Is that what we did? And we have 3 bedrooms. We have 6 people living in those 3 bedrooms. We started trying to figure out, can we put Isabella in a room with the other ones? Would they rather have been by themselves? There was a lot of this stuff, and in the end, basically, it was 2 families that took them in. One family took in 5 people, and that was, I'm not trying to shame you too badly here, because I just don't try to operate that way, but I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed by the situation as the pastor, that only one family was able to help. And again, I understand there were other people. Don't get me wrong, there were other people. There were some other people that were looking to help, but the circumstances just weren't, they just weren't right. You know who you were if you volunteered to help, and you know why it didn't happen or whatever else, whatever circumstance it was. We've talked about it. Gaius isn't the type of guy who needs convincing. He's not the type of guy who needs to get text after text after text or whatever. He understands the need to show biblical hospitality. And so the Apostle John commends Gaius for his faithfulness. And he encourages Gaius to continue to help the brothers. In verse 6, second part of verse 6, he says, "You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God." The main verse here being the main verb being, "You will do well," or you will do. It's the main verb here. Which is future tense. It's a way of asking Gaius to continue doing what he is doing. Keep up the good work, in other words. Christian workers will show up on Gaius' doorstep in the future. Demetrius, the carrier of this letter, will show up on his doorstep. And these people are going to need help. And we all know that Diotrephes is not going to help. Diotrephes will shut them out. Remember, dying. Diotrephes is bad. He'll shut them out. Gaius isn't the only one who helps the believers. We see the church of Antioch helping Paul and Barnabas on their way, sending them on their way to the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. Therefore, being sent on their way by the church, they were passing through Phoenicia and Samaria. And you should know those places from Sunday morning. You should, maybe sometimes in the past, you'd be reading through Acts and like, I don't know all these places. Well, you know where Phoenicia is, right? You know where Samaria is now, the capital of the former northern kingdom of Israel. They were passing through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and were bringing great joy to all the brethren. And when they arrived at Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all that God had done with them. So we're seeing that the churches helped Paul and Barnabas as they traveled along. We see Paul asking Titus, who was a pastor, to help several Christian workers in Titus 3:13. Diligently help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way so that nothing is lacking for them. Titus needed to make sure that they had everything they needed. That's exactly what John is asking Gaius to do here, and to continue to do it. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. There's a financial aspect that's involved here. That's what the word send is really talking about here. Financial support even. Support. Gaius is sending them on their way, and he's doing it in a manner worthy of God. Paul called the Colossians to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord in Colossians 1:10. He tells the Thessalonians to walk in a manner worthy of God, 1 Thessalonians 2:12. John expects Gaius to provide for these Christian men in the same way that he has been, and in a way that honors the Lord. Notice why Gaius should help these God-honoring Christian workers. Verse 7. We're going to see a couple reasons here. So this is kind of explaining. When you see that word, it's often a reference to explaining something, or that's an explanatory guard. Do you remember that? Explanatory guard? It's been a little while. Explanation. Or it could be the grounds or the reason of something. Or sometimes it could be both. So we have this. All right, you will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. For they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. So one of the reasons here is that they went out for the sake of the name. They're doing the work of the Lord. Their motivation's right. They're not doing this for their own benefit. And the fact of the matter is, there's often a great cost when it comes to Christian ministry. There's the time and money in the modern world of Christian education. Going through seminaries, like I've said this before, going through seminaries like having a second mortgage. Sometimes I'll talk to people and they're like, hey, talking about financing school. And they're like, so-and-so, they could borrow this much, and they could borrow that much. And I was talking to a missionary about 2 weeks ago. And he didn't go to seminary. And what I say is, hey, look, if we're going to entertain an additional missionary, we're expecting them to be, one, a church planting missionary, and two, we're expecting them to have completed at least a Master of Divinity level education at a theologically sound seminary. If that's not you, then I wish you the best, but it's not going to, let's not waste each other's time. And that's kind of what I say, something like that on the phone. Well, he started arguing with me about why you don't need a seminary education. And he said, it's costly and it takes time. And a lot of these people can't afford to go to seminary. And then when they go to seminary, then they have all this debt. And I'm just not interested in taking on debt. And I'm biting my tongue, man. I'm biting my tongue. I'm doing everything I can to keep my mouth shut. But when he said those last words, I couldn't stop myself. And I said, I have to heartily disagree with you, especially about the money part. Because when I went to seminary, I worked two jobs, and I went to seminary, and I stayed up till like 2 and 3. And you could ask my wife, sometimes 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, taking courses so I could spend time with the family at night. And sometimes, when are you guys going to go to bed? I felt bad, but listen, I got to do some work. It's like 10 o'clock. You guys got to go to bed. I got to get some work done. And then I would start my seminary work, and I would do it till sometimes 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I don't need someone telling me, you're going to go to seminary and graduate with debt, and you can't afford to go into the debt. No, you work. You work. All right? And if you don't have the money, then you save up, and then you go and you take the classes that you can afford. That's what you do. That's what I did. That's the right way of doing it. And I kind of told him that in a nice way, not the way I just said it. And at the end, I was like, but thank you very much. I do wish you the best. I'm going to see you later. And I was just like, I don't want to keep talking. And he argued. You remember that day? I was kind of arguing with that guy. I was the guy. It was so frustrating. It's like, if you're going to argue with me over something that I immediately I blocked them. I feel bad, but I'm just not in the mood to have to waste time arguing with people over whether or not our policies are good policies or not. You know what I mean? From someone I have no idea who they are. Well, here, you have these people that went out for the sake of the name, who are making sacrifices, not necessarily cutting corners, because they didn't have ancient seminaries and stuff like that. But today seminaries really help bridge the gap between 2,000 years ago and today, because there's a huge culture gap. But they did learning. I mean, the apostles sat under Jesus' ministry for 3 years. They sat under the ministry of God himself, so that's something. That's something more than sitting under a couple of guys in seminary for 3 years, right? So that's big. Well, these guys, they went out for the sake of the name. They're going out to do Christian work. And in that day, they might face persecution and death, and they might suffer shame in an honor-shame culture. They might suffer shame for his name like the apostles did. So they went on their way from the presence of the council, the Jerusalem council, not the Jerusalem council of Acts 15. This is the religious leaders that opposed Jesus. They went out from the presence of the council, the Sanhedrin, rejoicing that they had been considered worthy to suffer shame for his name, because Jesus suffered shame. And now they're sharing in his sufferings. So when you see this language of, doing well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God, and they went out for the sake of the name, we're seeing sometimes shame, sometimes suffering, sometimes difficulty as a result. Paul and Barnabas, they risked their lives for the name of Jesus. In Acts 15:24-26, since we have heard that some of our number to whom we gave no instruction have disturbed you with their words, unsettling your souls, it seemed good to us, having become of one mind, to select men to send to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul. That is, there's a theological problem. Paul and Barnabas, they go down to the Jerusalem church, they resolve that theological problem, and they're sending out a letter to the other churches to tell them, hey, listen, this is what we've discerned, scripturally speaking. This is what we've understood is right. And that is the one true gospel, and not that the Gentiles need to be circumcised or whatever else. Right? Salvation is by grace through faith. So they're sending, it seemed good to us, having become of one mind, to select men to send to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men who have risked their lives for the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so you have this situation where there are other men decades later who are dealing with the same thing, where they're risking their lives for the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And Gaius is helping these people. It's a good thing to help people like that. It's a good thing to provide for their needs. Now, that same thing is true today. They shouldn't be flying private jets, or driving around in Rolls Royces. Men of God shouldn't be doing that today. If they have to fly, they should ride with the demons. That's what Kenneth Copeland said, right? I can't fly commercial in a tube with a bunch of demons. Well, a Christian worker should have to fly with the demons like everyone else. If it's you understand I'm making fun of Kenneth Copeland. I'm not saying that they're, although I believe demons are in churches, so I honestly, believe that. They were in synagogues. But they shouldn't be living in poverty either. And so the first reason why Gaius is to support these Christian workers is because they're advancing the work of the Lord. They went out for the sake of the name. The second reason is that they've accepted nothing from the Gentiles. These Christian workers did not accept support from the lost world. They didn't finance their ministry and their work through ungodly means. I'm going to argue that some churches could learn that truth today, right? We do it right. We do it right. And you guys are part of that. Now, I had to reprimand, admonish, whatever word we used a little earlier about what happened with the Maranatha singers. And if you feel guilty about that, that's probably a good thing. But I also commend you for your regular, faithful support of this ministry, right? That's obvious that that's something that's taking place here. Well, these guys, they accepted nothing from the Gentiles. Churches today don't always garner support the way we do. They do all types of fundraising and yard sales and bake sales and rummage sales and bazaars, which I'm being told is the Middle Eastern term for like a flea market, festival, marketplace. I don't know why I use the word bazaar, but I use it. Or there's gambling and there's alcohol, and it's a sin to be supported by such means. It's a sin. Of course, these churches, they're not godly churches. It's like the local Roman Catholic Church and their festival, and they're going to sell off the scratch tickets so you could, gain a quick buck, quick riches. Throw $20 down and get. I don't know how much a ticket costs. I'm assuming they're $1. They used to be when I was a kid, or they're 50 cents a ticket. I don't know what they are. I have no idea. Maybe they're up to like $3 or $4 a ticket now. I'm assuming they're like a couple dollars a ticket, right? Anyone know? If you knew, you'd be afraid to tell me, right? I mean, all you have to do is walk by, and you could probably find out by looking. But John's Christian workers are supported by believers. The church supports Christian workers, and that's what Paul teaches as well. Check this out. So we find this in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where he says, so also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. And so Gaius needs to support these Christian workers because of their sacrifice for God. He needs to support them because they're not supported by the world. But we see a third reason why Gaius should support them. Verse 8. Therefore, we ought to support such men so that, now we're having here is purpose, or we could say reason, really, just connected to reason. Therefore, we ought to support such men. Remember that word support, it can be used and here is really used in the context of financial support, or at least helping take care of their needs. So that we may be fellow workers with the truth. So that's the third reason. The third reason is so that we can be fellow workers. In other words, this is a way in which we can help carry out the work of the gospel even when we're not able to do it ourselves. Or where we can support the work of missions even when we can't go out abroad and do that work of missions ourselves, or support, like say, a local church pastor or something, even when we may not have the gifts and the abilities to be a pastor or a missionary or an evangelist or whatever. This is a way where we can be fellow workers with the truth. And so John really kind of concludes this section with a strong encouragement for Gaius to support, therefore we ought to support such men. We have a moral obligation. It's another one of those different types of commands where it's like, hey, we're doing this. We're all doing this. All right? We're doing it. Is the idea that's here. It may not necessarily be the structure, but it's the idea. We ought to support such men. Failing to do so is to hurt the spread of God's work, to damage the spreading of the truth that we see here again in verse 8. Once again, you see the importance of truth. You don't support people who don't hold to the truth. It's why we're so stringent when it comes to our missionaries. It's why I'm so stringent when it comes to the pulpit. How do we do this? How do we carry out these commands, this command to support such men in today's context? So I've kind of said a few things about this already. From a corporate perspective, we're careful about missionaries. We don't want to be sending money to false teachers. Sometimes it means separating from false teachers. I'll give an example of one group that we separated from. When I came here, we were connected to Amazing Grace Missions, AGM. And by all outward appearances, they seemed okay. They were one of those, missions groups where they sent lay people to the fairs, to the local fairs, and then they would enlist the lay people of the church to go and help them give the gospel. And I went over there and, I would hand out some tracts and I would listen to some of what they would do, and I was like, wow, this is really manipulative. They're really manipulating people to try to accept their message. And I'd get the cards back, and people would be like, I'd call them up and I'd be like, hey, listen, I hear you prayed to get saved. I'd like to get you connected to a local church. Well, we just did that to shut the old guy up, or to stop the people from talking. Or you'd call it, you'd call the phone number, doo-doo-doo. The number you have called does not exist. And you're like, okay, this guy just prayed to get saved, and then he lied about the phone number he wrote down here. None of that sat well with me. And then they put out a newsletter. I still have a copy of it. I'm going to say this was somewhere around 2013, 2014 range. They put out a newsletter and they said, God revealed to us, God told us that, or through prayer or something, we discerned from God that 120,000 people should get saved next year through AGM Ministries. And I was like, that ain't right. That ain't how you do it. You know what I mean? And I disinvited them from coming here. So for those of you who are like, why don't the tent missionaries? Well, that's why. And I'll show you the letter if you want. And it was just creepy enough to make it seem like God was revealing specific details to them about how many people should get saved through their ministry. And that it just made sense because their desire to see some number of people get saved was consistent with their tactics, which was just to get people to pray and get that another little notch on my belt. And we had some people here that loved that. They loved just notching. This week I led 25 people, Lord. Where are they? Where are they? Because I haven't seen one person. Where are they? If they got saved, where are they? Right? They didn't get saved. They repeated something that you told them to pray, and you got your little notches there on your belt. Good for you. You just manipulated someone into having a false sense of security. So sound teaching, it's important. Same thing goes for the pulpit. I don't open the pulpit to just anyone. There aren't a lot of people I invite into this pulpit. I make sure that the person is theologically sound at least as much as I can. I'm almost always in this pulpit. I don't freely give it up. In fact, the last time I didn't preach on a Sunday morning, I think it's been 2 full years. I think the last person who preached in this pulpit on a Sunday morning was Joe, and I think right before him was Tim Jordan, right? Tim Jordan. Did you precede or follow? Man, I set you up for failure. I should have had you go first. Listen, I don't know. I'm sure you did a fantastic job. But I wouldn't want to follow. I wouldn't want to follow him, but I think it worked out schedule-wise. That's how it was going to be if I remember. But the fact that you're in a list with Tim Jordan, that's a nice list to be in. And at least you understand what I'm saying. So there's not that many people that I would invite in here. And it's not because I'm stingy about the pulpit. Listen, I love doing this. I love preaching. I'd prefer to do it than not do it. But I don't want a guy in here. That I don't know and trust, and that I don't know is theologically sound. And so we support such men from a corporate perspective, and we're careful about this from a corporate perspective, that is, we're sending out money to the mission field, but we're very careful about what we send out. But we also support them at a personal level, and maybe that means opening up your home to some Christian workers, like what happened this summer with the Maranatha Singers. That was an excellent opportunity. If I could go back in time, I'd have tried to find a way to get through this whole series and preach this message before they came. And we can't do that now. So you'll have to remember 5 years from now, the next time a group comes through here, you'll have to remember this message. But maybe that means something as simple as supporting the local church and its tithes and offerings. Maybe it means supporting another believer's needs in some way. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can apply this, but it honors the Lord Jesus Christ when we support legitimate Christian workers who teach the truth, and so you should also participate in supporting such men, which we do in this church. We do in this church. I'd like to ask you to take your hymnals and turn to 546.